Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring a concept that, might just completely change how you think about evolution.
Yeah,
We're talking about the selfish gene.
it's a good one.
We are going to be diving deep into Richard Dawkins's book, The Selfish Gene, to, try and unpack his ideas and see how they might change the way we think about everything from, altruism to the very meaning of life.
It's a real game changer, I think. We're so used to thinking about evolution in terms of like individual survival.
Right.
But Dawkins kind of flips the script and puts the gene front and center.
So instead of asking what traits help an animal survive,
Yeah,
we're asking what traits help a gene survive.
exactly.
That's a pretty big shift in perspective.
Yeah, it really is. It's like
Yeah.
zooming in on the molecular level and realizing there's this whole other drama playing out, right?
Right.
With genes just battling for survival across generations.
Okay, so let's unpack this selfish gene concept a little bit.
Sure.
It sounds a bit ominous. Like, these genes are tiny little villains plotting to, take over the world.
Right.
What does Dawkins really mean by selfish here?
Yeah, he's not saying that genes have like conscious motives or desires or anything like that.
Huh? Yeah.
Selfish is really just describing their inherent drive to replicate
Okay.
and ensure their own survival across generations.
So it's not about some like Machiavellian scheme.
Right.
It's more about the basic rules of the game, like how do you win?
Yeah, exactly. Like in a game of chess,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Like that.
Dawkins actually uses this analogy of genes as chess programmers,
Okay.
equipping their machines, the organisms, with strategies to navigate the world and ultimately win the game of survival.
I like that analogy a lot. It helps to kind of visualize how genes, even though they're just molecules, can have this profound influence on behavior.
Yeah.
But how does this actually play out?
Right.
How do genes shape the way an organism behaves?
So think of it this way. Genes build survival machines, organisms to carry and propagate them. They guide the development of everything, from like our physical bodies to our brains.
So it's like an architect's blueprint, but for a living, breathing being.
Precisely. Genes provide the instructions for building the organism,
Wow.
and those instructions influence everything from how an organism looks to how it acts.
And the brain is a pretty critical part of this survival machine, right?
Absolutely. The brain acts as the executive computer,
Okay.
processing information from the environment and making decisions that will hopefully increase the organism's chances of survival and reproduction.
And those decisions, even something as simple as fight or flight, are ultimately influenced by the genes that built the brain in the first place.
Exactly. Genes can't predict every challenge an organism might face.
Right.
So they equip their survival machines with a set of strategies and rules of thumb to deal with an unpredictable world.
Okay.
It's like those chess programs again,
Yeah.
They can't anticipate every move,
Right.
but they provide a framework for making decisions based on the current situation.
Okay, I see. So it's all about maximizing the chances that those genes will get passed on to the next generation.
Right.
But this raises a question.
Yeah.
If our genes are sort of pulling the strings, where does that leave free will?
That is the question.
Right.
That's a question we'll definitely be exploring further.
Okay.
But for now, let's shift gears a little bit and delve into another fascinating aspect of the selfish gene perspective,
Yeah.
how it reframes our understanding of altruism.
Yeah. This is where things start to get really interesting to me.
Definitely.
If genes are inherently selfish, how can we explain acts of apparent selflessness?
Right.
Like a mother bird risking her own life to protect her chicks.
It's a question that has puzzled biologists and philosophers for centuries.
Totally.
But Dawkins argues that even seemingly altruistic behaviors can ultimately be understood in terms of gene-level selfishness.
So how does that work?
Right.
How can a gene that promotes self-sacrifice possibly survive and spread through a population?
Well, remember that genes are shared among relatives.
Okay.
So a gene that prompts an individual to help a close relative, even at some cost to itself, might actually increase its own chances of being passed on to future generations.
Because those relatives are likely to carry copies of that same altruistic gene. It's
Exactly.
like helping your own genetic legacy survive.
Exactly. This is what's known as kin selection.
Mhm.
It's one of the key ways that genes can promote cooperative behavior, even in a world where individual organisms might sometimes make sacrifices.
So helping your family isn't just a social good.
Right.
It's a smart evolutionary strategy.
In a way, yeah.
I never thought of it that way. But what about those cases where animals help individuals that aren't related to them?
That's where another fascinating mechanism comes in.
Okay.
Reciprocal altruism.
Okay. Tell me more about that. Does this involve some kind of calculated exchange of favors?
Exactly. It's like an I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine kind of arrangement.
Interesting. So even though individuals might appear to be acting selflessly, there might be a deeper evolutionary logic at play.
There often is. And this just scratches the surface of how the selfish gene concept can change our understanding of behavior.
Yeah.
But before we dive deeper into that, let's take a step back and explore how genes actually compete and cooperate within a population.
All right, let's do it. We've talked about genes battling for survival.
Yeah.
But what does that battlefield actually look like?
Think of it as a vast genetic marketplace. The gene pool, it's where all the genes in a population are constantly interacting, competing for resources, and vying to be passed on to the next generation.
So it's not just about individual genes fighting it out. It's
Bro.
more like a complex ecosystem
Yeah,
with all sorts of alliances and strategies.
precisely. And this brings us to another key concept,
Okay,
alleles.
alleles. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that term.
Think of them as different versions of the same gene,
Okay,
like different flavors of ice cream,
right.
They all code for the same basic trait, but with slight variations.
Okay.
For example, you might have a gene for eye color, but there are different alleles that code for blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, and so on.
Okay, I see. So these alleles are essentially competing with each other for a spot on the chromosome,
Exactly.
which is like their ticket to the next generation.
You got it. And this competition can get pretty intense,
Oh, wow.
with some alleles employing some rather cunning strategies to increase their chances of success.
Like what? What kind of strategies are we talking about here?
Well, some alleles are just better at promoting survival and reproduction than
Yep.
others.
Right.
Maybe they make their host organism stronger or more attractive to mates.
Okay.
But some alleles take a more aggressive approach,
Oh,
distorting the usual rules of inheritance to their own advantage.
hold on. Are you talking about those outlaw genes that Dawkins mentions?
Yes.
The ones that can actually harm the individual organism in order to spread themselves?
You're catching on. These are the ultra-selfish genes, like the meiotic drive genes, which can manipulate the process of cell division to increase their own chances of being passed on, even if it's detrimental to the organism as a whole.
Wow. So there's even conflict and competition happening within the genome itself.
It is. And it just goes to show that the selfish gene perspective can help us understand even the most complex and seemingly paradoxical aspects of life.
This is all pretty mind-blowing. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to explore.
I know, right?
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve even deeper into the world of the gene pool and see how these ideas play out in the real world. Stick with us.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Welcome back. Last time we were talking about this idea of the gene pool, as a kind of marketplace where genes are constantly like competing and, making deals. It's such a vivid image.
Yeah.
It makes you think about genes almost like tiny entrepreneurs just hustling to, make a profit in the currency of survival.
It's a powerful analogy.
Hmm.
And just like in any marketplace, there are rules of the game, strategies for success, and even the occasional cheater trying to game the system.
Okay, so let's break down those rules of the game a little bit. What determines whether a gene succeeds or fails in this genetic marketplace?
Well, just like in that primordial soup where life first emerged,
Yeah.
the fundamental ingredients for success are longevity, fecundity, and copying fidelity.
Okay, let's unpack those terms a little bit. Longevity, I'm guessing, means that genes that help their host organism live longer
Right.
have a better chance of getting passed on.
Exactly.
It's pretty straightforward. The longer you live, the more opportunities you have to reproduce.
Exactly. A gene that predisposes you to like a fatal illness early in life.
Right.
Won't be very successful even if it makes you incredibly strong or attractive.
Right?
On the other hand, a gene that helps you live a long, healthy life,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't make you the flashiest individual, is more likely to persist in the gene pool.
So it's not just about surviving, it's about surviving long enough to pass on those genes. And fecundity, I assume, is all about having lots of offspring.
Precisely. A gene that makes an organism more fertile or better at attracting mates,
Yeah.
has a clear advantage. It's like having a higher birth weight for your genetic stock.
So it's a numbers game, too. The more offspring you have, the more chances those genes have to spread to the next generation. And copying fidelity, I'm
Yeah.
guessing that refers to how accurately genes are replicated.
You got it.
Yeah.
Every time a cell
All
divides,
right.
those genes need to be copied.
Yeah.
And just like when you make a photocopy,
Yeah.
there's always a chance for errors to creep in.
And those errors are what we call mutations, right?
Right.
And most mutations aren't beneficial, are they?
Most are either neutral or harmful. So a gene that is replicated with high fidelity, with fewer errors,
Right.
is more likely to persist over time.
It's fascinating to think about these tiny molecules engaged in this epic struggle for survival across, millions of years. It's like a whole other world operating beneath the surface of what we can see.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really struck me when I first read The Selfish Gene was this idea that even seemingly useless features
Oh, yeah.
can be explained from the gene's perspective.
You're talking about what Dawkins calls selfish DNA, right?
Right.
That junk DNA that doesn't seem to code for anything.
Exactly.
I remember learning about that in biology class, but we never really talked about why it was there.
It's a puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
From the perspective of the organism, it seems wasteful to carry around all this extra DNA that doesn't seem to serve any purpose.
Yeah. It's like having a bunch of useless clutter in your attic.
Right?
You might wonder why you haven't thrown it out yet.
Exactly. But Dawkins suggests that this junk DNA might actually be parasitic,
Okay.
or at least harmless hitchhikers.
Mm.
You know,
Right.
taking advantage of the replication machinery that the functional genes have created.
So even within the genome itself,
Yeah.
there's this kind of competition going on. It's
Right.
like a cellular version of survival of the fittest.
Precisely. And this highlights a crucial point. What's good from the perspective of a single gene
Yeah.
might not always be what's good for the individual organism.
So this selfish gene perspective can sometimes lead to conflicts of interest within an organism.
Yeah, in a way.
That's pretty wild.
It is. And it's an area of research that has really blossomed since the selfish gene was first published.
Wow.
Scientists are discovering all sorts of ways that different genes within a genome can compete for resources
Right.
or manipulate processes to their own advantage, even if it's detrimental to the organism as a whole.
So evolution isn't always about creating perfectly harmonious systems.
No.
It's more about this constant struggle for survival, playing out at all levels from the molecular to the individual to the species level.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process with constant tension and adaptation. And sometimes those adaptations lead to outcomes that seem counterintuitive or even paradoxical from our human perspective.
Like the whole issue of altruism that we were talking about earlier. It's easy to see how behaviors that directly benefit the individual,
Right.
like seeking food or avoiding predators, would be favored by natural selection.
Right.
But how do we explain those seemingly selfless acts, especially those that put an individual at risk?
Well, as we discussed, Dawkins argues that even apparent altruism can often be explained in terms of gene-level selfishness.
Okay, I'm following you so far.
Mhm.
But how can a gene for self-sacrifice possibly spread through a population? It seems like it would be quickly eliminated if it kept making its host organism do things that decreased its chances of survival.
Remember those close relatives we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Kin selection plays a big role here.
Mm.
A gene that prompts an individual to help a close relative, even at some cost to itself, could actually be increasing its own chances of survival.
Because those relatives are more likely to carry copies of that same gene.
Exactly.
It's like investing in your own genetic future.
Right.
Even if it means taking some risks in the present.
Precisely. And there are other ways that genes can promote cooperation even among non-relatives.
Yeah.
Remember reciprocal altruism.
Yeah, that I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine kind of arrangement. But how can you be sure that the favor will be returned? It seems like there's a lot of room for cheating in that system.
You're right, there is.
Mm-hmm.
And Dawkins goes into detail about the conditions under which reciprocal altruism is likely to evolve.
What kind of conditions are we talking about?
Well, for one thing, the individuals need to interact repeatedly,
Okay.
so there's a chance for the favors to be repaid. They also need to be able to recognize each other
Right.
and remember past interactions.
Right.
And there needs to be a mechanism for punishing cheaters, those who take but don't give.
So it's not just a naive, everyone be nice to each other kind of system. There's a
Uh-huh.
lot of strategic calculation going on, even at the level of these unconscious genetic interactions.
Exactly. And this is where the analogy of the gene pool as a marketplace becomes really powerful. You know, genes aren't just passively floating around.
Right.
They're actively engaged in this complex web of interactions.
Right.
Forming alliances, trading resources, and even engaging in a bit of deception to gain an advantage.
It sounds more like a Wall Street trading floor than a primordial soup.
In some ways it is.
Hmm.
And this leads to the evolution of complex social systems with intricate webs of cooperation and competition playing out at different levels.
It's amazing how this selfish gene perspective can illuminate so many aspects of life,
Yeah.
from individual behavior to the evolution of entire societies.
It is. And it can help us to understand not only why we see so much cooperation in nature,
Right.
but also why conflict and competition are inevitable parts of the evolutionary process.
Right. It's not all about harmony and symbiosis. There's a dark side to evolution, too.
Definitely. And that brings us to another fascinating and somewhat unsettling aspect of the selfish gene perspective.
Okay.
If our genes are really calling the shots,
Right.
where does that leave our sense of free will?
Yeah, this is a question that has been bugging me ever since we started this deep dive.
Right.
Are we just puppets dancing to the tune of our DNA?
It's a big question and one that we'll tackle head on in the final part of our exploration.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. I can't wait to hear what Dawkins has to say about this. We've covered so much ground already, but I have a feeling the most profound insights are yet to come. Stick with us for the grand finale. Welcome back to our deep dive into the selfish gene. We've been exploring some pretty mind-bending ideas from genes as these selfish replicators, to the complex dance of cooperation and competition that shapes evolution. But I think the biggest question looming over all of this is, what does it all mean for us, as humans?
It's a great question. It's the question that Dawkins himself grapples with throughout the book. He doesn't shy away from the implications of his ideas for our understanding of human nature and morality and even the meaning of life.
Yeah, in the last part, we were sort of left with this cliffhanger about free will. If our genes are these selfish entities, kind of driving our behavior, does that mean we're just puppets on a string?
Right.
It's a pretty unsettling thought.
Yeah, it can be. But Dawkins argues that, while our genes might provide a blueprint for our bodies and brains, we're not simply robots, blindly following their instructions.
So there's hope for us yet. We're not just slaves to our selfish genes.
Not necessarily. Dawkins points out that we have the capacity for learning,
Okay.
for reason, and for making conscious choices.
Okay.
He believes that our ability to simulate the future in our minds, to anticipate the consequences of our actions, gives us a degree of freedom that other animals lack.
So we can rebel against our genetic programming. We can choose to act in ways that defy our selfish genes.
To a certain extent, yes.
Yeah.
We can choose to have fewer children than we're biologically capable of.
Right.
We can choose to help strangers, even if there's no direct benefit to ourselves or our kin.
Okay.
We could choose to create art, music, and literature, even though these activities don't directly enhance our survival or reproductive success.
That's a bit of a relief. I was starting to feel like my fate was sealed by my DNA. But if we have this capacity for free will, this ability to transcend our biological programming, where does that leave the selfish gene?
Right.
Does it become irrelevant?
Not at all. I think it's more about recognizing the powerful influence of our genes,
Okay.
but not letting them dictate our every action.
Okay.
It's about understanding the forces that shape us,
Right.
both biological and cultural,
Right.
so that we can make more informed choices.
So it's not a denial of our biological nature,
Right.
but a recognition of our potential to go beyond it.
Precisely. Dawkins uses the metaphor of a computer program.
Mm-hmm.
He says that our genes provide the basic code, but we have the ability to write our own subroutines to modify the program as we go along.
That's a great analogy. It helps to visualize how our genes and our environment, our nature and our nurture, can interact to shape who we are.
Exactly. And I think this is where the real power of the selfish gene perspective lies. It doesn't reduce us to mere puppets of our DNA, but rather empowers us to make more conscious choices about how we live our lives.
It's like knowing the rules of the game allows you to play it more strategically,
Right.
more thoughtfully.
Exactly. It's about understanding the hand we've been dealt, so to speak,
Right.
but also recognizing that we have the power to play those cards in a way that creates something meaningful and fulfilling.
This whole conversation has been such a mind-expanding experience. We started with this idea of genes as these tiny self-serving entities, and we've ended up talking about free will, morality, and the meaning of life. It just goes to show how profound and far-reaching these ideas are.
I agree, and I think it's a testament to Dawkins' skill as a writer and a thinker that he's able to present these complex ideas in a way that is both accessible and thought-provoking.
Absolutely. The Selfish Gene is one of those books that stays with you long after you've finished reading it. It challenges you to see the world in a new light, to question your assumptions, and to appreciate the incredible complexity and beauty of life, even at the molecular level.
Well said. And for our listeners, I think the biggest takeaway here is the power of perspective.
Yeah.
By shifting our focus from the individual to the gene,
Mm-hmm.
we gain a deeper understanding of the forces that shape us,
Right.
both as individuals and as a species.
Mm.
But it's important to remember that this is just one way of looking at things.
Right.
There are many other perspectives out there, and ultimately it's up to each of us to decide how we want to make sense of the world and our place in it.
It's about asking questions, exploring different ideas, and never stopping to learn and grow. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you a new lens through which to view the world and your place in it.